people say, "Oh, how'd you get your kicks? Well, having come back from space, done a
Yeah, yeah,
spacewalk,
yeah.
launched to space, where'd you get your excitement from?" It's like, wow, no, driving cars around a racetrack, riding motorbikes. I
Yep.
mean, that's a different level of excitement. It's equal to flying to space in many respects.
My name is Jim Farley, and this is Drive. Space, the final frontier. I think we all remember how Star Trek used to open every episode. The mission to explore strange worlds, to seek out new life, new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has ever gone before. Well, my guest today has gone there before. Tim Peake is a retired European Space Agency astronaut and a military officer. In 2016, Tim became the first British ESA astronaut to visit the International Space Station and walk in space. I find that Britain to be such a special place for cars and planes. For cars, I don't think there's a more passionate group of car enthusiasts on the planet. I mean, even more than California, where I lived. And the same almost for planes, and yet your industry was so vibrant during and after the war. The invention of the jet engine was, in your country, and you had so many unique, aeronautical, civil aviation companies there. And somehow over time it just kind of dwindled. Do you think Britain has regrets? I mean, you're the Formula One capital of the world, but you could also have been the aviation capital of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are regrets, and certainly from what I went on to do later in life in the space program, I think we had the Black Arrow. We had a space program. We were launching
I didn't know that, really.
Yeah, we launched from Toowoomba in Australia, and we put a satellite into orbit, which is still up there, not operating, obviously.
Yeah.
But so yeah, we did. We've had these industries. We were doing a lot. You mentioned obviously Sir Frank Whittle there, 1937,
Yes.
the jet engine, and the development of the jet engine in the post-war years onto Concorde. There's a heritage of aviation, a rich heritage,
Sure is.
and Rolls-Royce, both Motors and Rolls-Royce Aerospace, are obviously still our flagship companies in the UK.
What was the test pilot school like? Is that like, the British Top Gun, or is it something different?
Oh, the test pilot school is fantastic, and there are several around the world. There's two in the US and one in France, but the one in the UK is really good because I think it gives a mixture of practical and flying skills.
How about those pilots? I think about all those young guys who flew from North America to your country through Greenland, all those piston World War II large bombers flying from, many of them built by Ford Motor Company here in Michigan. Like, what it must have been like being in your 20s flying across the Atlantic Ocean. Must have been such an adventure.
Incredible, absolutely incredible, and to do that in single engine aircraft as well in some cases.
Yes.
So a real experience, very exciting, and gaining huge amounts of confidence in your aircraft, in what you're doing. And I've had the privilege of speaking to a few World War II pilots, and it's quite interesting, the response, because we look back and we think how terrifying it must have been to be in the Battle of Britain, and the statistics,
Yes.
and
Yes.
you're going up
Yes.
against a very well trained, very well prepared enemy.
Yes.
But one of the pilots was very honest, and he said, "Look, I was 20 years old. I was in the prime of my life. I was in the most phenomenal aircraft that had been, developed at the
Sure.
time." He said, "I loved it. I loved every minute." And he said, "Yes, we were doing a very difficult job in demanding conditions, and yes, our job as a fighter pilot was to go out and attack aircraft to bring them down." But he said, "At 20 years old, I'm not going to lie to you, it was the best job in the world." And I thought that's something you don't hear that much of, is that kind of raw honesty of yeah, it was a horrible war, but at 20, you're doing the best job you could possibly want to do.
I want to transition into your life and your work as an astronaut. Was that a first choice for you, or how did you shift from aviation to space?
It was interesting because I don't know, growing up in the US, you've had a space program for 60 years now, and then it's
Yes.
a career path that
Yes.
if you want to try and go for that, you can dream big and you can aim for it. But growing up in the 1980s in the UK, we didn't have a space program. We had never had a British astronaut fly to space. That didn't happen until 1991,
I see.
to the Mir space station where Helen Sharman flew, and that was
I
that was a
see.
one-off commercial mission. So we were kind of watching you guys. We were watching the shuttle program, or
Yes.
watching the Mir space station over in Russia, and it was something that I didn't think was available to me as a career path. So that's why aviation kind of took over as my passion. And it wasn't until I was in my 30s that the European Space Agency put out a selection and said, "Hey, astronauts wanted." It was on the internet. Please apply, and it's open to all member states. And that was the first time in 2008. It was the first time that a British citizen was able to apply to the European Space Agency to be an astronaut. And it was right time, right place, right qualifications. And I thought, wow, this is a golden opportunity. I've just got to go for it.
Amazing. Amazing. The chances. And for you to be ready and have the ambition. So I have to ask you, are all these movies about space? Like, my wife's a script supervisor, so every time we watch a movie, she's like, "Oh no, that's not got good continuity." So, when you see a space movie, like, what's it like? What's your perspective?
It's interesting. I think Hollywood's there to entertain us. I
I
always go
see.
to the
Yeah.
movies. Yeah,
Yep.
I always go to the movies with an open mind, and I'm never too critical. But you can't help but watch some movies and think that that's completely wrong. I think some of my favorites. I mean, Apollo 13 is amazing.
In
Obviously,
that was amazing film.
it's
Yes.
an incredible film, and it's so well documented. And they've got the transcripts of every transmission that was
Right.
made, so of course it's accurate as well,
Yep.
as being well acted, and the drama is just incredible. Interstellar, I thought, was a really bold movie as well. I love that. I
I
love
did too.
the science behind it was phenomenal. I
Yes.
thought they're very brave in
Yes.
taking on some really difficult scientific topics. Gravity,
Yeah.
the science wasn't so good there, but
Yeah.
actually what was good about Gravity, as fun as it was to watch George Clooney flying around on a jetpack, the cinematography there was
Mm.
unbelievable, and they really nailed that. I mean, that's what Earth looks like from
Mm.
low Earth orbit. They got that absolutely brilliantly perfect. The Martian was another great one, of course.
Yes, I loved it. I love that movie for lots of reasons. But, let's go back to what you just said, which is the overview effect. I can't
Yeah.
imagine as a human being what it would be like looking back at Earth. What is that like?
It is the most incredible experience, and I think for a number of reasons, you've entered a new realm. So it's not just what your eyes are telling you, and it's a bit like diving. I love diving, and when you go down quite deep, you feel like you're entering this new realm, and you have to get comfortable with it. And you're aware that you're in a hostile environment. You're aware that you shouldn't really be there. You couldn't
Right.
survive if it wasn't for the equipment that's keeping you alive. And when you're in space, you're very aware you've been through this incredibly violent experience that's got you there. I mean, the launch that's crazy, 8.5 minutes getting you up to 17,500 miles per hour with a lot of energy. And that cuts out, or when it cuts out, there's complete silence. And it's this feeling of silence and weightlessness that you've kind of been put into an incredible realm. And you look back at Earth and just see this beautiful, planet beneath you. And it's quite magical, quite surreal. And of course, to then have 6 months to really experience that and get used to that environment, I think that kind of builds to this overview effect that people talk about.
But does your perspective change as a human being when you come back to Earth? Like, you can't unlearn what you saw.
No,
So,
not at all.
does it change your perspective about what's
Very much
important and
so.
not, or what matters or not? How did it change you?
Very much so. They're on a number of different levels. Just when you look at the planet and then you look at the blackness of space and the vastness of space and how isolated and remote we are, I think that's really powerful. Earth is my favorite planet in the solar system. It's the one that we can live on, and we've got to look after that. But when you look at Earth against that vast black backdrop, it makes you realize just the scale of the universe, the vastness of it. And we are on this tiny little spaceship Earth, flying through the solar system. You look at Earth and you kind of, on the one hand, feel very small and insignificant. But on the other hand, you think, well, hang on a second, we are just the creation of the universe. It's taken 13.8 billion years to get to this point. And as far as we know at the moment, we're the most complex conscious organism that there is alive. So it makes you feel quite special, actually.
So your body was up in space in this hostile environment where, our bodies were not designed to be. How long do you think is the maximum without, simulated gravity or something like that? How long do you think the human body can be in space and not have permanent damage to your bone density and the other parts of your body?
I mean, that's a really good question. I was up there with Scott Kelly, who was my commander when I arrived, and he spent a year in space. He was about 8 months into his year-long stay when I arrived. And I was surprised at just, what great condition he was in, physically, mentally. It was if he was on day 2 of his mission. Now, that's thanks to a regime of exercise. We exercise for about 2 hours a day on the space station, keeping our cardiovascular system in good shape, keeping our muscles in good shape, trying to stop that bone density from atrophying. So I think humans could stay in space for a very long period of time. And actually, there's 2 things you could do. You can either exercise and keep yourself fit, ready for coming back into a gravity environment, or you could just let your body completely adapt to weightlessness, and it
Yes.
would become the perfect human being for living in zero gravity.
Right.
Now that would be great for living in weightlessness. It would be very cruel for that individual to then come back to Earth or onto another planet, because gravity is very punishing, and that's why we're exercising. We're trying to keep ourselves fit, not fit for space, but fit for coming back to Earth. So I think really the answer to the question, your question, actually comes down to radiation. That's our biggest threat. Is every day on the space station we're getting the equivalent of about 8 chest X-rays in terms of our radiation dose. So I reckon around 3 years at the moment is probably the longest that you'd want to spend in space. But
I
as our
see.
spacecraft get better, the shielding gets better, then
Yes.
that duration will increase.
So how about all this talk about going to Mars? Like when you hear about that idea of going to Mars, like what would be the profile of a person who would say yes to that? And what would you have to do for the human body to even make it through such a experience as a human being?
Mars is going to be fascinating. The psychological profiling is going to be very important. Who would say yes? I think you'll find hundreds of astronauts will say yes to it. And I think you kind of have to transport yourself back to the kind of 16, 17, 1800s when we,
Yes.
as a Navy, in
Yes.
the 1650s, for example, a 3-4 year mission was quite ordinary to go
Yes.
away for that length of time, to be away from home. And so I think that we've got used to short duration missions, and 6 months being a long time in space, a year being a very long time in space. Actually, I think we just need to reset, and
I
we will
see.
as we go on, as we travel further through the solar system. But certainly for our Mars missions, 3 years will become the norm. And I think we'll get completely used to that. But psychologically, it'd be very interesting watching Earth disappear till it's just a speck of light, no bigger than a star in the sky. Because even for us, every morning on the space station, you wake up, you look out the hatch window, and
Yep.
there's Earth. It's very
Yes.
big in your
Yes.
window. For
Yes.
the Apollo astronauts, they're 400,000 kilometers away from Earth. But even for them, there was Earth rising and very, very clear in their visibility. But Mars, you're going to wake up on Mars, and actually it could be very, very difficult to even find Earth, and you wouldn't be able to distinguish it really from all the other stars out there. So I think psychologically, that's going to have a big impact on the crew.
Traveling in space, you have to deal with the realities of confines of small, cramped spaces. It's just a reality. How do you get over the claustrophobia of, months and potentially years in small spaces with other people?
I think some of the things that we do in training help with that. So the European Space Agency, they run a caves training program. We go and live in a cave for 7 days. And this is these are technical caves. It takes about a day and a half just to get to base camp. There's
I
a lot
see.
of rope work, a lot of ascending and descending. They're very, very tight spaces. So there's a couple of things there. It introduces risk into your training. So you're very aware that if you were to fall and slip and have an accident, that's a very, very dangerous situation. And NASA run a program underwater for 12 days. And these environments introduce you to very close, confined environments. So you get to know how you react to that. But really, when you go into the spacecraft, that's the moment when the hatch closes and you're packed in as a crew. Every spacecraft is pretty small. You're packed in as a crew and the hatch gets closed on top of you. You just have to have the mindset. You have to get comfortable with your new environment. You have to kind of make it cozy, make it home, feel it embracing you, and just get yourself into the right place to go and do the mission. And actually, the space station is quite a big place. Once you get onto the space
I
station, it's the
see.
size
I see.
of a 747
I
inside.
see.
So for 6 or 7 crew, you're absolutely fine up there. But I know for some people, it's actually putting on the helmet for when you go on a
Makes
spacewalk.
sense. Yep.
Some people find that the most claustrophobic feeling.
Yep. I can understand listening to you just for a few minutes why, space, the adventure, the incredible scientific progress, all the attraction of space. But on the other token, I find, life back here on Earth has got all sorts of opportunities too. Why do you think that all of these billionaires want to leave our planet? I mean, I can understand to some extent intellectually, the idea of becoming a multi-planetary species. But on the other hand, don't we have enough to do here? I guess my question is, what's your perspective when you read about someone who has more money than they could ever spend, that they could help lots of people with their resources, but they still want to devote their mission to, space, to exploring?
Yeah, God, that question touches on lots of different areas, and I think you've got lots of different reasons. Things like space tourism, for example. Well, that's just an entrepreneurial mission to try and allow high net worth individuals to go and fly to space, have 4 or 5 minutes of weightlessness, and come back down again. And I guess there's we've spoken about the overview effect.
Yes.
There's a market there for
Yes.
people who just want to experience that. They want to leave the planet. They want to look back at Earth from space. And if you've got the money, then here's the vehicle that you can do that in. But that's not something that I'm particularly interested in. And I think actually, in terms you mentioned why the billionaires investing in space, I think that's much more far-sighted. It's looking at the space economy. It's looking at the future.
I see.
And the space economy is going to dominate in the next 50 to 100 years. And part of the reason for that is actually SpaceX in bringing the cost of access to space down, which used to be, tens of thousands of dollars, about $57,000 to get just a kilogram into low Earth orbit on the space shuttle. And now on a Falcon Heavy, you can probably do that for about $1,500.
I see.
And when SpaceX gets Starship to work, we're now talking maybe $200 to $300 for a kilogram to space.
I see.
And that has opened up a huge market. So now we can start thinking of not just going to space, but actually building things in space, manufacturing solar farms, for example, that can provide energy back to Earth.
When you think about being on that rocket or returning to Earth and re-entering, and the violence, so to speak, and the energy required, as you mentioned, how do you think about risk and stress? I can imagine what most people think of could be like really bad things happen, but the way you must have to think about risk management and stress has got to be totally different, because for 6 months everything is life and death. Are you trained to handle that, or do you think that's a disposition you're born with?
I think it's a little bit of a mixture. Most astronauts would, if you looked at their profile, their psychological profile, and their appetite for risk, they would have a higher than normal appetite for risk, without a doubt. But training plays a huge part in that as well, and being prepared. And it's interesting because as a test pilot, you tend to be actually much better qualified in some respects, to understand the risk you're taking. I mean, I spent 10 years as a senior test pilot on the Apache helicopter, and I knew that aircraft inside out. I'd taken it, higher and faster than the Boeing pilots that built it. And so you have an intimate knowledge of what you're doing, the risk you're taking. As an astronaut, you have to place a lot more trust in the sort of organizations you're working for.
Yes.
You have to, trust those quality control mechanisms that we have in place, trust the risk culture that you have as an organization in the space agencies. But actually, there is a huge amount of risk in launching and re-entering. But I think probably as an astronaut, the greatest risk we take is heading outside the space station on a spacewalk, because the scope for human error out there is unbelievable, and that really comes down to preparation and training, and just doing this time and time again, and having confidence in your own abilities, and generating options so you've got different things you can do if various things go wrong.
But there must be that moment when you let go.
Yeah.
that you can't manage intellectually, almost emotionally. That must be a very human experience when you let go.
Outside on a spacewalk, yeah,
Yes.
Absolutely. And there was one time, myself and Tim Peake, my NASA colleague, we had to fix a solar panel at the furthest edge of the space station, and we got there a little bit early. There was still sunlight, so there was live electricity hitting the panel, and Houston said, "Guys, hang out for 10 minutes, wait for the sun to go down." Which I don't think two astronauts have ever been told to hang out for 10 minutes on a spacewalk before. But it was an opportunity to, put those long tethers on and then just push away from the space station.
I'm like sweating already just thinking about, like, I'm going to go to the end of this tether. I hope it holds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely incredible. And you're just kind of letting yourself float there. 1 minute looking down on Earth, the next you're on your back and you're looking up at the universe. And it's very hard to describe, but it is quite unbelievable.
How many humans have felt that?
Well, about 610 have gone to orbit. How many have spacewalked?
Yeah.
I think perhaps about 200, maybe 150 to 200 astronauts have spacewalked.
Like, that's crazy. You did something that, like, 3-4 billion people, let alone the history of 6 million years that Homo sapiens have been on the planet. Like, the percentages are crazy when you think about the number of people. You could fit in like a tube train that have done that over the course of all humanity. That's amazing.
It's a very, very privileged position to be in. But it's still the highlight for me. If you said, what one moment would you bring back? It's that moment, really. It's being out at the edge of the
Forget
space
about
station.
being a CEO. That's nothing.
Yeah.
I have to ask you, what was your first car?
First car was a Mini Clubman Estate.
Oh, that's a good one. I love it. With the wood panel. Oh, did it have the? It had the wood panels. Okay,
It did. Yeah, it was that kind of that brownie beige that Mini came out with as a color. I absolutely loved that car. Loved it. I drove it from. I got my license at about 17, and I was working. I left school after my A levels, and at 18 years old, I was working in a pub in Chichester. So I drive it.
I've probably been in that pub in Chichester. Yes, I've probably been to that pub. Yeah.
Yeah, the Nag's Head. It was a great one.
Oh, well,
and,
well done.
I remember one day my boss asked me to go and pick up a barrel of Guinness because we'd run out on a Saturday night. And it was a terrible time to run out. Went and picked up a barrel of Guinness from the brewery and put it into this back of this Mini Clubman. And on the way, I hit a pothole and the whole suspension just completely went. And from that moment onwards, I had to sit on a pillow every time I drove the car because the suspension, the shocks are just completely gone. But yeah, that was my first car. I loved it.
That is so funny. My wife, the first time I went to Goodwood, we were driving through Chichester, and my wife said, we should probably get our car cleaned. So we pulled off, and there was a typical in the UK, a little gas station that had a very small automated wash equipment. So we put in our money, we got in there, and we got stuck in there. We were stuck in there for 2 hours.
Oh no!
So then our car wouldn't get out. So we're like, let's go to the pub. So I'm guessing we probably went to the pub,
Yeah,
and I probably did have a Guinness. So, yeah. Well,
mate.
minis were such a breakthrough for our industry, and the suspension, like you said, that was a very, I mean, it was a little complicated, and of course, they had a lot of, bushings and a lot of things that could go wrong over time. But it was very advanced. The suspension in the Mini was really an advanced breakthrough for our industry.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like I say, I think it was a fantastic car, and then of course, the Italian job did so much to raise its profile
Yes.
over here. I remember, so many people watched that, and from that moment onwards, minis
Now,
and racing
did the
were
Mini have
huge.
a sliding window, or was it? Did you roll it up and down?
So it had, I think it was sliding in the back, from
I
what I
see.
remember.
I
Yes,
see.
yeah, but front windows were rolling up and down, so I had the handles there. Yeah.
Well done. Well, those are fantastic cars, and what do you drive these days?
Very boring now. I've got two teenage boys, and we do mountain biking, lots of activities. So
Good.
I've got a big dog as well. So we've got
Yep.
a Volvo XC90, just because it's
Nice.
big enough to have a roof box on and throw everything in the back. But we were last year we were driving a Ford Ranger Raptor,
Oh, well
and
done. Yeah, very
we
subtle.
we fell in love with that
Yeah,
car. We all. My wife was in the army as well. That's where we met, and she was in the Royal Logistics Corps, so a
I
truckie.
see.
And she's a higher, more highly qualified driver than I am. But yeah, so she enjoyed driving that as well. But what a great car that is! Fantastic
And
fun.
I don't think there's any better place in the planet to drive off road than in your country. I mean, you have
Yeah.
some of the best off road tracks anywhere. And I absolutely love driving and the diversity of driving in your country. So, what is it like? Because you race and you're interested in racing, so am I. And to try to control a car around Goodwood, it takes a lot of concentration. But even the most powerful car, how does your mind comprehend what it's like to be sitting in a rocket during launch compared to what most people think of as kind of enthusiast experiences on a motorcycle or a car or whatever?
Oh no, I mean they're very different experiences. Now I think still, because people say, oh yeah, how'd you get your kicks? Well, having come back from space, done a
Yeah, yeah,
spacewalk,
yeah.
launched to space, where'd you get your excitement from? It's like, wow, no, driving cars around a racetrack, riding motorbikes. I did the hill climb
Yep,
on a Triumph Speed Triple. I
yep.
mean that's a different level of excitement. It's equal to flying to space in many respects. And in terms of G forces as well, I think people who don't race cars, they don't realize how physically demanding it is. And with the levels of not just acceleration, but the braking, the G-force under braking and turning, you can come back after 5 laps around Goodwood, and you can make yourself feel really, really unwell, more so than you can in a fighter jet in some
Mm.
circumstances. So no, they're very different levels of excitement, but definitely comparable in terms of the experience. I think in the rocket, like launching into space, it's a very smooth acceleration, and
I
it's
see.
very powerful. A lot of vibration. You've got 9 million horsepower, and you really do feel that. I mean, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun, but
9 million. Oh God, that is awesome. I thought our GTD Mustang at 815 horsepower was a lot. 9 million. That's like, that sounds like enough.
when you lift off the launch pad, the rocket's at its heaviest, and so it's
I
not,
see.
it's not actually that spectacular. It's quite
Yep.
a gentle build up, and that G-force gradually builds and builds, and then the solid rocket boosters get jettisoned. You're up about 4G at that point, and the really fun part of a rocket launch is the last 2 or 3 minutes, because at this point you're up in space. You're outside of the atmosphere. The rocket's gone from being horizontal, oh sorry, it's gone from being vertical to now pretty much horizontal. And this is the point that you have to get up to 25 times the speed of sound. And that's when you're just pinned back into the seat and you're doing about
Oh.
4Gs. And that's the moment where this feeling of speed just becomes a little bit incomprehensible. It is quite incredible. You kind of think, when's this going to stop? How much longer can we be going this
Oh,
fast for?
interesting.
So it's the last part of a rocket launch. And now that SpaceX, you get all the video cameras with the launches today.
Yes.
And what I love about them, they've got the two little clocks in the corner. So if you watch a SpaceX launch, you've got the speed and the altitude. Have a look at how fast the speed increases in that last kind of 3 minutes. That's where you get the biggest kick, definitely.
Okay. I have learned so much from you, and your perspective of being in space, looking back at our planet, looking out into the cosmos, that is something I don't think I can unlearn. So thank you for sharing that. I guess I want to ask you the question that I like to ask all my incredible guests. What advice would you give to the CEO of Ford?
I'm not sure I'm in a place to give the CEO of Ford any advice whatsoever, but I think, my advice through life has always just been open doors and grasping opportunities. And I think that never to have any regrets about what you've done. There's been times where people have tried to steer me in a certain direction throughout my life.
Yes.
And it just wasn't what I was passionate about. And I had to fight against that. And certainly becoming a test pilot as a military officer was a career path that people said you shouldn't really take that. That's not going to do you any favors whatsoever. Looking back in hindsight, I can see it was the perfect decision. So I think it's about having faith and confidence in what you want to do, being passionate about it, and keeping all doors of opportunity open for the future.
What great advice. I sometimes think at the track, should I be doing this as a CEO? Should I be getting in a GT4 Mustang or a Cobra at Goodwood and, putting it out there? Because I want to compete, and I know most other people wouldn't do it, but I know it's right for me. But sometimes I'm not sure, so I appreciate you saying that. And there's a million professional examples for all of us, or even examples in our personal life. That's great advice, and thank you so much for your time, and most of all, thank you for sharing your experiences with all of us.
Thank you, Jim. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Really enjoyed it.
I can't wait to see you at Goodwood. I'll look you up when I'm there next.
Please do. That would be fantastic.
Cheers.
Thanks very much, Jim.
Cheers.
Thank you.